You're sitting in a room full of people, laughing at a joke you don't find funny, nodding at opinions you don't share, smiling when inside you feel absolutely nothing. And then someone looks at you, really looks at you, and for a split second you panic, because you wonder if they can see through it all. If they can tell that you're performing this version of yourself that everyone seems to love, but that feels nothing like who you actually are. This is the strange theater of being human. We are walking contradictions, complex creatures whose behaviors often betray what we're truly feeling, whose bodies speak a language our mouths never speak out loud. And the fascinating thing is that while we're all pretending to have it figured out, while we're all playing these intricate social games, there are patterns, invisible rules, psychological truths operating beneath the surface of every interaction, every choice, every moment. And today, I want to take you on a journey through 50 of these truths, 50 psychological facts about human behavior that will change the way you see yourself and everyone around you. These aren't just interesting tidbits to share at parties. These are keys to understanding the hidden machinery of the human mind, the silent forces that shape our relationships, our decisions, our entire lives. So let's start with something you've probably experienced but never understood. If someone looks back while walking away from you, it means they care about your opinion of them. Think about it. You're leaving a conversation, walking away, and something makes you glance over your shoulder. That backward glance is not random. It's your subconscious checking, measuring, wondering how you're being perceived. It's vulnerability disguised as casualness. When someone looks back, they're essentially saying without words that your judgment matters, that they're not as confident as they pretended to be, that some part of them needs to know they left a good impression. And this happens in romantic contexts constantly. Someone walks away after a first date and looks back. That glance is loaded with meaning, with hope, with the silent question of whether they mattered to you. Now let's talk about smiling. If someone smiles after insulting you, it's not a joke, and you're not being sensitive. That smile is a psychological manipulation tactic called a double bind. They're delivering cruelty with a grin, so that if you react with hurt or anger, they can accuse you of overreacting, of not being able to take a joke. It's a way of inflicting pain while maintaining plausible deniability. People who do this are often deeply insecure themselves, needing to put others down to feel superior, but too cowardly to own their aggression outright. That smile is not warmth, it's a mask. And your gut feeling when this happens, that feeling that something is wrong even though they're smiling, trust that. Your intuition is reading the incongruence between their words and their expression, and it's telling you that you're being harmed. Here's another truth that might sting. If someone consistently ignores you and you still love them, you're not in love with them. You're in love with the idea of earning their attention. This is one of the most painful patterns in human relationships. We confuse the desperate chase for validation with love. We mistake emotional unavailability for mystery. We translate rejection as a challenge to prove our worth. But real love doesn't feel like constantly reaching for someone who's always just out of reach. Real love doesn't make you feel like you're auditioning for a role you'll never get. If someone ignores you repeatedly, they're showing you exactly how much space you occupy in their life, and it's not much. The tragedy is that the more they ignore you, the more you might obsess, because your brain interprets their indifference as something you need to fix, something you need to earn. But you can't earn someone's basic respect and attention. Those things should be freely given, or they're worth nothing. Let's shift to something more subtle. If a woman sleeps with her legs pulled up toward her chest in a fetal position, psychologically this often indicates a need for comfort and protection. The fetal position is the body's way of self-soothing, of creating a sense of safety. People who sleep this way regularly are often dealing with anxiety, stress, or emotional vulnerability. It's the body literally trying to protect itself even in sleep. And this extends beyond just sleep positions. How we hold our bodies tells stories our mouths never speak. Crossed arms can signal defensiveness or discomfort. Leaning away from someone during conversation often means we're creating psychological distance. Mirroring someone's body language unconsciously means we're building rapport and connection. Our bodies are constantly betraying our true feelings, speaking a language that bypasses our conscious control. Here's something that might surprise you. If someone cries a lot, it doesn't mean they're weak. It means they've been strong for too long. Tears are not a sign of fragility. They're a sign that the dam finally broke, that the pressure became too much to contain. People who cry easily are often people who feel deeply, who absorb the emotions of the world around them, who carry not just their own pain but everyone else's. And in a culture that tells us to be tough, to push through, to never show vulnerability, crying becomes this radical act of honesty. It's your body refusing to lie anymore, refusing to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. So if you're someone who cries often, stop apologizing for it. Your tears are not a weakness. They're proof that you're human, that you haven't numbed yourself into emotional oblivion. And speaking of holding things, let's talk about this. If you can't stop thinking about someone, it doesn't always mean you love them. Sometimes it means you're trying to solve the unsolvable puzzle of why they hurt you. Obsessive thoughts about someone, especially someone who treated you poorly, are often not about love at all. They're about your mind trying to make sense of betrayal, trying to find the moment where things went wrong, trying to answer the unanswerable question of why you weren't enough. Your brain hates unresolved narratives. It will loop the same memories over and over, analyzing, dissecting, searching for closure that may never come. This is why getting over someone who hurt you is often harder than getting over someone who loved you well. Because with hurt, there's always that lingering question, that need to understand. Now let me tell you something about loneliness. If you feel lonely even when surrounded by people, you're not being dramatic, you're experiencing emotional isolation, which is different from physical aloneness. You can be in a crowded room and feel utterly invisible. You can have a partner, friends, family, and still feel like no one truly sees you. This happens when the connections in your life are surface level. When people know your name but not your story. When you're performing a version of yourself that gets approval but doesn't feel real. Emotional isolation is one of the most painful human experiences because it combines the longing for connection with the despair of not finding it. Here's a psychological fact that will change how you see conflict. If someone apologizes but keeps doing the same thing, they're not sorry for hurting you. They're sorry you reacted. Real apologies come with behavior change. Real remorse shows up not just in words, but in transformed actions. When someone repeatedly apologizes but nothing changes, they're performing apology as a tool to get you to stop being upset, not because they actually regret their behavior. They've learned that saying sorry buys them time, buys them forgiveness, buys them another chance. But apologies without change are just manipulation with better PR. Let's talk about anger for a moment. If someone gets angry over small things, they're not overreacting to the small thing. They're reacting to the accumulation of everything they haven't said, everything they've swallowed, everything they've been minimizing for weeks or months or years. Anger is almost never about the trigger moment. It's about the 1,000 moments before that where boundaries were crossed, where feelings were dismissed, where hurt was quietly absorbed. People don't explode out of nowhere. They explode because they've been imploding for too long. If someone only remembers the bad things you did but forgets all the good, they've already decided how they feel about you and they're collecting evidence to support that narrative. This is called confirmation bias. Once someone has made up their mind about who you are, they'll unconsciously filter every interaction through that lens. They'll remember every mistake you made but forget every kindness. They'll interpret neutral actions as hostile. They'll construct a version of you that justifies however they want to treat you. Here's something about intelligence that most people get wrong. If someone is truly intelligent, they don't need to prove it by making others feel stupid. Real intelligence is curious, humble, eager to learn from anyone. Insecure intelligence is loud, condescending, desperate to be recognized. When someone constantly corrects you, talks down to you, makes you feel dumb in conversations, that's not a reflection of their brilliance. It's a reflection of their fragility. They need you to feel small, so they can feel big. Let's talk about silence. If someone gives you the silent treatment, they're not being mature, they're being emotionally abusive. The silent treatment is a punishment tactic designed to make you feel desperate, anxious, willing to do anything to restore connection. It's a power play that says your feelings don't matter until they decide they do. Healthy communication includes taking space when needed, but that space is communicated. Boundaries are explained. Disappearing without explanation, ignoring calls and texts, Making someone panic about the status of the relationship, that's manipulation. Here's a truth about memory. If you remember every detail of a conversation but the other person doesn't, it's not that you have a better memory, it's that it mattered more to you. We remember what impacts us emotionally. We remember what we care about. So when someone forgets an important conversation you had, forgets plans you made, forgets details about your life that you shared, they're showing you how little emotional weight those things carried for them. And this is painful because it reveals the asymmetry in the relationship. Let's discuss something uncomfortable. If someone constantly talks about how good of a person they are, they're usually trying to convince themselves more than you. Truly good people don't announce their goodness because they're too busy just being good. They don't need the validation. They don't need the recognition. But people who are deeply insecure about their morality, who have done things they're ashamed of, who are not living according to their own values, they compensate by broadcasting their virtue loudly and constantly. Here's something about texting that reveals a lot. If someone takes hours to respond to your messages but is constantly on their phone, you're not a priority. I know people make excuses, they're busy, they forgot, they're not good at texting, but the reality is simpler and harsher. We make time for what matters to us. We respond quickly to people we're excited to talk to. If someone consistently makes you wait while you see them active on social media, while you know they're available, they're sending you a clear message about where you rank in their life. Let me tell you about laughter. If someone laughs at their own pain, if they joke about trauma, they're not healed, they're coping. Humor is one of the most common defense mechanisms against unbearable feelings. When you can't process something, when something hurts too much to look at directly, you make it funny, you make it lighter, you diffuse it with a punchline. And this isn't inherently bad, humor can be part of healing. But when it's the only way someone talks about their pain, when every serious conversation gets deflected with a joke, that's a sign of deep, unprocessed hurt. Here's a fact about generosity that might surprise you. If someone is excessively generous in the beginning of a relationship, showering you with gifts, attention, compliments, be cautious. Healthy relationships build gradually. Love bombing, this overwhelming rush of affection and generosity, is often a manipulation tactic used by people who need to secure your attachment quickly before you see who they really are. They're not being generous. They're making an investment that they expect to pay off in your loyalty and tolerance later. Let's talk about advice. If someone always gives you advice but never asks how you're feeling, they don't want to help you. They want to feel superior. There's a difference between supporting someone and positioning yourself as the expert on their life. Real support starts with listening, with asking questions, with trying to understand someone's experience before offering solutions. But some people skip all of that and go straight to telling you what to do, not because they actually understand your situation, but because advice giving makes them feel wise, needed, important. Here's something about crying that matters. If someone tells you to stop crying, they're not concerned about you. They're uncomfortable with emotion and want you to manage their discomfort. Telling someone to stop crying is one of the cruelest things you can do because it's essentially telling them their feelings are inconvenient, that their pain is too much, that they need to pack it away for your comfort. But emotions don't work that way. You can't just turn them off because someone else is uncomfortable. Let me share something about people who are always busy. If someone is always too busy for you but never too busy for others, you're not dealing with a scheduling issue, you're dealing with a priority issue. We've all used the excuse of being busy. It's socially acceptable, it sounds reasonable, it lets us avoid the harder truth, which is that we're choosing not to make time for someone. But when you notice that the person who's too busy for you somehow finds time for other people, for other activities, for things that matter to them, that's information. Here's a fact about eye contact. If someone can't maintain eye contact with you during important conversations, they're either lying, feeling guilty, or deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability. Eyes are called the windows to the soul for a reason. When we look someone in the eyes, we're allowing them to see us, to read us, to access something true. And when we avoid eye contact, we're hiding. This doesn't mean someone is necessarily lying every time they look away. Sometimes they're just processing emotions, but consistent avoidance of eye contact, especially during significant moments, is a red flag. Let's discuss social media for a moment. If someone posts constantly about their relationship, about how happy they are, how perfect everything is, They're often trying to convince themselves as much as their audience. Genuinely happy people don't need to perform their happiness. They're too busy living it. The constant posting, the carefully curated photos, the over-the-top captions about how blessed they are, that's usually compensation. It's a way of creating a narrative that might not match reality. Here's something about anger again, but from a different angle. If you get angry at yourself for feeling angry, you're stuck in a shame spiral that will never resolve. Anger is a normal human emotion. It's information. It tells you when a boundary has been crossed, when something is wrong, when you need to protect yourself. But if you've been taught that anger is bad, that it makes you difficult or unreasonable or unlovable, you'll turn that anger inward. You'll get mad at yourself for getting mad. Let me tell you about people who play victim. If someone is always the victim in their own stories, if nothing is ever their fault, if every relationship ended because the other person was crazy or toxic or abusive, run. Because either they genuinely have terrible judgment and keep choosing awful people, or more likely they're the common denominator. People who refuse to take accountability for anything are dangerous because they will never apologize, never change, never take responsibility for the harm they cause. Here's something about gut feelings. If something feels off, it probably is, even if you can't articulate why. Your intuition is processing information faster than your conscious mind can analyze. It's picking up on micro-expressions, tonal shifts, behavioral inconsistencies, things you might not even realize you're noticing. So when you get that uncomfortable feeling in your stomach, that sense that something isn't right, don't dismiss it as paranoia or overthinking. Let's talk about compliments. If someone only compliments your appearance and never your mind, your work, your character, they're not seeing you as a full human being. Appearance-based compliments feel good momentarily, but they're also reductive. They reduce you to a body, to a face, to something decorative. And if that's all someone notices about you, if they never acknowledge your intelligence, your creativity, your kindness, your humor, they're not interested in the real you. Here's a truth about people who are always positive. If someone is relentlessly positive, never admitting struggle or pain, they're either in denial or they don't trust you with their truth. Toxic positivity is a real thing. It's the refusal to acknowledge negative emotions, the insistence that everything is always fine, the performance of happiness even when drowning. And people do this for different reasons. Some genuinely believe they have to be positive all the time. Others are terrified of being seen as weak or burdensome. Let me tell you something about jealousy. If someone gets jealous over normal friendships and social interactions, that's not love. That's insecurity and control. Healthy partners trust each other to have lives outside the relationship. They're not threatened by friends, by coworkers, by casual conversations with others. But insecure partners see every interaction as a potential threat. They monitor your phone, question where you've been, get upset when you talk to certain people, make you feel guilty for having a life that doesn't revolve entirely around them. And I need to pause here for a moment and ask you something directly. Have you ever felt like your emotions are too much for people? Like you're always the one who cares more, who feels more, who loves more? If the answer is yes, I want you to leave a comment right now. Something simple like, I feel too much. Because when you share that, you're not just validating your own experience, you're also making another person reading this feel less alone in theirs. And I'm going to tell you something important. Sharing this, putting it into words, that's an act of courage. That's you finally giving voice to something you've carried silently. So go ahead, comment, and know that I read every single one. Now let me continue. Here's something about listening. If someone listens only to respond, not to understand, you're having a monologue disguised as a dialogue. Real listening is active, engaged, curious. It's about absorbing what someone is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk. But so many conversations are just two people taking turns speaking without actually hearing each other. You say something and the other person immediately jumps in with their own story, their own opinion, their own agenda. Let's talk about change. If someone says they'll change but only makes an effort when you're about to leave, they don't want to change. They want to keep you. Real change happens because someone recognizes they need to grow, because they're internally motivated to be better. But performative change happens when the consequences of not changing become unbearable. When you threaten to leave, when you've finally had enough, suddenly they promise to do everything you've been asking for all along. Here's a fact about people who are always late. If someone is consistently late, they're not bad at time management. They're telling you that your time doesn't matter as much as theirs. Being occasionally late happens to everyone. Traffic, unexpected delays, emergencies. But chronic lateness is a choice. It's a statement that whatever they were doing before seeing you was more important than respecting your time. Let me share something about social energy. If being around certain people drains you while being around others energizes you, pay attention to that difference. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Some people are emotional vampires. They take and take and take and never give back. After spending time with them, you feel exhausted, depleted, like you've run a marathon. Other people fill you up. They make you feel lighter, more yourself, more alive. Here's something about apologies that matters. If someone apologizes, but then brings up what you did wrong in the same breath, that's not an apology, that's a negotiation. Real apologies are clean. I'm sorry for what I did, period. No buts, no justifications, no shifting focus to your mistakes. But defensive apologies sound like I'm sorry, but you also did this thing. Or I'm sorry if you felt hurt, which isn't actually an apology at all. Let's discuss boundaries. If someone gets angry when you set a boundary, they were benefiting from you not having one. Boundaries are not mean. They're not selfish. They're necessary for healthy relationships. But people who've been taking advantage of your lack of boundaries will react badly when you start setting them. They'll call you difficult. They'll accuse you of changing. They'll make you feel guilty for suddenly having limits. Here's a truth about depression. If someone seems fine but suddenly starts giving away possessions, getting their affairs in order, or saying goodbye in subtle ways, that's not them getting better. That's them making a plan. Depression is incredibly good at hiding. High-functioning depression means someone can go to work, smile at parties, maintain relationships, all while being in profound pain. And sometimes, when someone has decided to end their life, they actually seem happier, calmer, because they've found what feels like a solution to their suffering. Here's something about humor in relationships. If someone constantly makes jokes at your expense in front of others, they're not being funny, they're being hostile. There's a difference between playful teasing and using humor as a weapon. Playful teasing is affectionate, mutual, and stops immediately if someone expresses discomfort. Hostile humor is one-sided, public, designed to embarrass. Let me tell you about people who are always victims of circumstances. If someone never takes accountability and always has an external reason for why their life isn't working, they're choosing powerlessness. Yes, life is hard. Yes, circumstances matter. But there's a difference between acknowledging obstacles and using them as permanent excuses. People who always blame their boss, their partner, their parents, their circumstances, they're avoiding the terrifying truth that they have agency. Here's something about attraction. If you're only attracted to people who are unavailable, emotionally distant, or inconsistent, you're not attracted to them. You're attracted to the familiarity of trying to earn love. This is one of the most painful patterns because it feels like preference, like chemistry, like destiny. You meet someone who keeps you at arm's length, and you feel that pull, that intensity. But that's not love. That's your attachment wounds recognizing themselves. Let's talk about people who love bomb. If someone showers you with affection, gifts, and declarations of love very early, and then suddenly withdraws, they were never in love with you. They were in love with the idea of winning you. Love bombing is a manipulation tactic where someone comes on intensely strong, makes you feel like you've met your soulmate. They text constantly. They want to see you every day. They talk about your future together after a week. Here's a fact about confidence. If someone is truly confident, they don't need to put others down. Confidence is quiet. It's secure. It doesn't need to prove itself constantly. But insecurity masquerading as confidence is loud, boastful, constantly comparing, constantly asserting dominance. People who are actually secure in themselves are generous with praise, comfortable with others shining, happy to celebrate someone else's success. Let me tell you about selective memory. If someone only remembers the times you were wrong but conveniently forgets every time they hurt you, you're dealing with someone who's rewriting history to protect their ego. In healthy relationships, both people can acknowledge mistakes, can remember the times they messed up, can hold themselves accountable. But in toxic dynamics, one person positions themselves as always right, always the victim. Here's something about people who play devil's advocate. If someone always plays devil's advocate when you share something you care about, they're not being intellectually curious. They're being contrarian for the sake of feeling smart. There's a time and place for debate, for exploring different perspectives. But when you share something personal, something that matters to you, and someone immediately launches into why you're wrong, they're not engaging with you. They're performing intelligence. Let's talk about therapy speak. If someone uses therapy language to avoid accountability, to manipulate, or to shut down conversations, they're weaponizing healing concepts. Terms like boundaries, gaslighting, trauma, and triggering have become part of mainstream vocabulary, which is mostly good. But some people have learned to use these words as shields. They'll say you're violating their boundaries when you ask for basic accountability. They'll accuse you of gaslighting when you point out their lie. Here's a truth about respect. If someone only respects you when you're useful to them, that's not respect. That's opportunism. Watch how people treat you when you can't do anything for them. Watch how they treat you when you're struggling, when you're not at your best, when you have nothing to offer, because that's when you see who they really are. Let me share something about personal growth. If you're growing and changing and someone gets threatened by that, they preferred the version of you that stayed small. Not everyone will be happy about your healing, your success, your transformation. Because when you change, when you set boundaries, when you stop accepting less than you deserve, the people who benefited from the old you will resist. Here's something about kindness. If someone is kind to you but cruel to waiters, service workers, or anyone they perceive as beneath them, they're not actually kind, they're strategic. True character shows up in how people treat those who can do nothing for them. Watch how someone treats people they don't need to impress, people they don't need anything from, because that's who they really are. Let's talk about something that affects almost everyone. If you feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for not being productive every second, you've internalized capitalism, and you need to unlearn it. You are not a machine. Your worth is not tied to your output. Rest is not something you have to earn, but we live in a culture that tells us the opposite, that tells us we're only valuable if we're constantly achieving. Here's something about comparing yourself to others. If you constantly compare your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel, you'll always feel inadequate. Social media has made this worse because we're bombarded with curated versions of other people's lives, the best moments, the perfect angles, the carefully edited narratives. And we compare that to our messy reality, our struggles, our failures. Let me tell you about people who never ask questions about you. If someone talks endlessly about themselves but never asks about your life, they don't see you as a person. They see you as an audience. Healthy conversation is reciprocal. There's a natural back and forth, a genuine curiosity about each other. But narcissistic people will dominate every conversation with their stories, their problems, their achievements. Here's something about conflict avoidance. If you avoid conflict at all costs, you're not keeping the peace. You're silencing yourself. There's a difference between choosing your battles wisely and never standing up for yourself at all. People who avoid conflict often grew up in environments where expressing disagreement was dangerous. So they learn to swallow their feelings, to keep quiet. But unexpressed needs don't disappear, they accumulate. Let's discuss something about first impressions. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable in the first meeting but you can't explain why, trust that feeling. Your nervous system is reading threat cues that your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. Maybe it's the way they stood too close. Maybe it's the way they asked invasive questions. Your body knows before your brain catches up. Here's a fact about triangulation. If someone is always telling you what others said about you, especially negative things, they're trying to create conflict and position themselves as the insider with information. This is a manipulation tactic. They'll say things like, "So-and-so said this about you. I thought you should know." And it makes you feel paranoid, insecure. But often these conversations never happened, or they're wildly exaggerated. Let me share something about people who never celebrate your wins. If someone can't be genuinely happy for your success, if they always find something negative to say, if they minimize your achievements or change the subject quickly, they're jealous. And jealousy isn't always obvious. Sometimes it looks like backhanded compliments. Sometimes it looks like pointing out potential problems. But the core is the same. Your light makes them feel dim. And this brings me to something important. If this video has resonated with you, if you felt seen, if you've recognized yourself or people in your life, This channel exists for exactly that reason. To create a space where we can talk about the real stuff, the hard stuff, the things that matter, but that most people don't have the language for. Every week I bring you content about psychology, about relationships, about healing, about understanding yourself and others with this same depth and care. And if you want to keep going on this journey with me, if you want to continue exploring what it means to be human in all its messy, complicated beauty, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This isn't just about watching videos, it's about being part of a community that values emotional honesty, that's committed to growth, that understands the power of self-awareness. So subscribe, and let's keep doing this work together. And let me leave you with this final thought. Being human is complicated. We're all walking around with wounds we pretend aren't there, with patterns we inherited that don't serve us, with defense mechanisms that once protected us but now imprison us. And the work of being alive, of being conscious, of being awake to yourself, that work never ends. But it's the most important work there is, because the more you understand yourself, the more you understand why you do what you do, why you feel what you feel, why you choose what you choose, the more power you have to make different choices. And that's what all of this is about. Not judging yourself for your patterns, not shaming yourself for your wounds, but seeing them, understanding them, and deciding who you want to be moving forward. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not damaged beyond repair. You're human. And being human means you're capable of extraordinary growth, profound change, and deep, real, honest connection. You just have to be brave enough to look at yourself clearly, to face what you find there without flinching, and to choose again and again to do the work. And if you've watched this entire video, if you've stayed with me through all 50 of these truths, you're already doing that work. You're already choosing consciousness over comfort. You're already brave. So keep going. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep becoming more yourself. Because the world needs people who are willing to do this kind of inner work, who are willing to break their own patterns, who are willing to heal so they can show up differently for themselves and for everyone they love. If this video resonated with you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next video.